All right. Good day, everyone. And thank you for joining today's Ask Me Anything, where we answer your questions about cannabis legalization in New York. We do this every Wednesday at 4:20 p.m. New York City time. I'd like to welcome back those of you who have joined us before. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I certainly hope you'll make it a regular occurrence. My name is Jeffrey Hoffman, and I am an attorney in New York whose legal practice focuses entirely on cannabis. If you would like to contact me, you can do that either here on LinkedIn. I welcome all connection requests, or you can reach me at my email address, which you can see at the bottom of the screen, info@420jurist.com, which I guess you might say makes me the 420 jurist. And as the 420 jurist, I will be answering your questions, roughly half of them from a list of questions I've gotten from previous Ask Me Anything sessions, and roughly half of them from questions which you post in the comments here today. So if you'd like to ask a question, now is certainly the time to do so. Although I will note, I've now got about 20 pages of questions in a Google Doc, so you guys have been absolutely crushing it every week. So thank you for that. Some week we may just have to do an all past session question session because there are so many of them now. I do have to make my usual disclaimer before we get started, and that is that I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney, at least not yet. I do see a few of my clients in the event today, so I don't want you guys to worry. You are, of course, still my clients. But for the rest of you, I am not your attorney, and today's event is not legal advice. It does not create an attorney-client relationship, and it is not a solicitation to offer legal advice. And so with that, let's get to the questions. And I'm going to start, I think, with one that we got in a past session, and then do a couple that were asked in the comments already for today's session. So the first question from before is, will GMP be a requirement for processors? That is, good manufacturing processes. Will that be a requirement for processors? And the answer to that is yes, they absolutely will be a requirement for processors. Actually, if you look at the application for the conditional processor license, which is currently open here in the state of New York, there's a place for you to upload your GMP certificate. And it's very clear from the documentation associated with that license that you will have to do that if you wish to be a conditional processor in the state of New York. And anything that they're going to require for the conditional processors along those lines, you can bet your bottom dollar that that will be a requirement for the standard processors when that license becomes available. All right, let's go to a next question. And I did notice a person or two commenting about the sound here. Hopefully, folks are able to hear that. If not, I would encourage you to restart your browser or the web session that you are looking at. I guess there were two folks that commented about sound. If some other folks could just weigh in as to whether or not they're able to hear things. It looks like we've got several comments. But if folks would that are commenting would just weigh in as to whether or not they could hear, we'll try to address those before we begin any further questions. It doesn't look like anybody wants to weigh in, so I'm going to go ahead and answer further questions. Up there, Mr. Walker says he hears me loud and clear. So therefore, Miss Lawley and Mr. Budd, I would encourage you restarting your browser window or even perhaps restarting your computer because it does appear others hear the sound just fine. Thank you, folks, for clarifying that. All right, on to the next question. Have heard anecdotally that a significant presence of unlicensed shops and an unanticipated lack of enforcement against these operators is going to be a major hurdle for retailers and therefore everyone else in the legal game. Interested to hear your perspectives on this. All right, so I'm not so sure that it was unanticipated that there would be a lack of enforcement. As everyone knows, New York has taken probably the most justice-centered and social and economic equity centered perspective as far as how they're going to deal with the regulated cannabis industry in the state. I don't think anyone expected there to be any arrests. Frankly, we're done with incarceration for cannabis in the state of New York, and that didn't come too soon. So we certainly don't want to be arresting people and incarcerating people anymore. Excuse me. We are definitely in what I like to call the interzone of the establishment of the regulated cannabis industry here in New York. Um, it absolutely needed to happen such that cannabis became legal faster than they were able to implement the regulated market and open the stores. We simply needed to make it so that no one was getting arrested for cannabis in the state of New York anymore, especially at the low levels. Our society has done a tremendous amount of damage, particularly to individuals in minority communities vis-a-vis cannabis enforcement for the length of time that I've been alive. It's just been disastrous. The number of families we have destroyed, the untold billions, if not trillions, in economic damage that we as a society have done to people for just the dumbest things, for arresting people and incarcerating them for smoking a joint or possessing a quarter bag of cannabis. I mean, come on, is this a joke? But that's what our society did for so long. So when the pendulum swings in the opposite direction, unlike a real pendulum in the world of humanity, it often swings a good bit further than folks expect it to. So for me, it was not surprising that there has been no enforcement. I talked to a sergeant in the police precinct here in New York City, where I live, and he indicated to me that they have been told, as he said, from on high, that they are to be hands off. And again, I don't think that's surprising. New York, as a state and our country, has had a horrible relationship with enforcement of cannabis enforcement. And so we just don't want any more arrests at this time. Now, what is going to happen as far as this? So, Governor Hochul, who, if you're in the cannabis industry, I don't really care what your party is, you need to ensure that she gets reelected. If you remember, Governor Cuomo sat on his thumbs and did not appoint the members of the Cannabis Control Board for the last 6 months of his term. We basically wasted 6 months getting our regulated industry started. The very first thing that Governor Hochul did when she came into office was appoint the members of the Cannabis Control Board. You're not going to find someone that is more cannabis friendly in our current possible slate of elected folks for governor that is going to be more cannabis friendly. So I really don't care what your politics are. If you work in the cannabis industry in New York and you're in favor of us having a robust, regulated cannabis industry, you need to make sure that Governor Hochul gets reelected. Again, regardless of your party, I don't want to hear anything from folks otherwise. She is cannabis friendly, and the other people that can possibly get elected are about as cannabis unfriendly as you can get. So if you're in the industry, give that some thought on election day. So what is going to happen is Governor Hochul has in her executive budget $1.2 billion projected over the next 6 years in cannabis taxes, not cannabis revenue for the state, cannabis tax revenue for the state. And I'm a gambling man, and I'm going to take the over on that. I think it's going to be more than 1.2 billion over 6 years, and that is 6 years from when sales start, not 6 years from now or March 31st, 2021, when the law was enacted. That's 6 years from when adult use cannabis sales start in the regulated market in New York. And so to get to that $1.2 billion in tax revenue, I assure you Governor Hochul cannot have hundreds and thousands of non-licensed cannabis stores all over the state. So it's very similar to what happens over in the alcohol industry. The way we are forming the regulated cannabis industry here in New York is vaguely similar to what is going on in the regulated alcohol market that we are all quite familiar with. And the example I like to give is, let's say I decided to open Jeffrey's F the Taxman gin joint down in Greenwich Village here in New York City. And I went in the New York Post and on CBS News and NBC News and ABC News and all of the usual media outlets here in the city. and said, "Hey, everyone, come on down to Jeffrey's F the Taxman gin joint down in Greenwich Village. We are the best gin joint in the city. All of our drinks are 40% less than any other bar you're going to go to anywhere in New York City." And why is that? I mean, come on, licenses? Who needs a stinking license? Question for you. How long will it take the state liquor authority to shut down my gin joint? And usually, when I ask this question of people, most people say right away, or how quickly does it take me to make a phone call? But certainly within a number of hours, I can probably expect a visit from the state liquor authority after they see me basically giving them the finger in the New York Post. And I think you're going to see something very similar here in New York State. Obviously, if the enforcement authorities don't know that something is happening, say a legacy market participant who's very quiet and who is operating respectfully in the way they did for the past 30 years they've been in business. I mean, if the Cannabis Control Board and the OCM don't know about them, there's really no way to enforce against them. But all of these entities that have been doing it, as we like to say in the legal profession, obviously and notoriously, I think they're going to have a problem because the Cannabis Control Board and the OCM have already sent them cease and desist letters. And I think it's only a matter of time, particularly once you see the licensing begin to happen for those 9 standard licenses. And once you actually see the tax dollars flowing, Governor Hochul is not going to want these other businesses in business. So the ones that have been very vocal about their operations, that have been very public about where they are located and what they are doing, my assessment is that they are going to get a visit from the enforcement authorities. Or it's entirely possible that the authorities will simply send a letter to their landlord. I think the letter would say something to the effect of, "Dear Mr. Landlord, we are to understand that there is an illegal cannabis business operating in your establishment, on your premises. The state of New York has been known to seize buildings where illegal activities are taking place. We just thought you would like to know this. Love and kisses, Governor Hochul." And I do think that the landlord is probably going to take care of the state's problem for them if they choose to make that approach. But big picture, again, guys that are operating without a license that no one knows about. I mean, there are certainly people here in the state of New York operating illegal alcohol establishments without a license, and they're being very clandestine about it and not going in the New York Post and on CBS News and telling everybody about it. So if the authorities don't know about those businesses, they can't afford to enforce against them. But I do think those that are operating openly and notoriously, I do think that they can expect a visit at some point in the future from the authorities. All right, let's get to a few other questions. And this one was very relevant to things that happened this past week, last several days. And quite simply, the question is just 6 words. Schumer proposal. What do you think? What do I think? So my take is that the window for federal cannabis legalization in the United States closes, fundamentally in January of 2023. That is what, roughly 5 months from now? 4 months from now? 5 months from now? When I do believe the Republican Party will take the gavel in one, if not both, parties of, one or both houses of Congress. It does seem fairly certain that they will take the House. The Senate does seem to be a little bit more up for grabs. I did see some release from, I think, 538.com that maybe it's over 50% for the Democrats keeping the Senate, but who knows? But I do think that's going to happen. And unfortunately, as we all know, there really is only one party in this country that passes cannabis laws or does things about cannabis in a positive fashion for the industry. When I say that, I know everyone likes to bring up the lovely young lady from South Carolina that's a member of the Republican Party that has a legalization bill. But frankly, the people in her own party think she's out to lunch. So frankly, she should be a Democrat with that proposal. But So I think the window closes in January, which really means the window closes here in November after the election. And it doesn't, again, open, I don't think, until 2029. I am not terribly optimistic about the Democratic Party's hopes for 2024. I do think the Republican Party stands the better chance than not of being elected at that time, although we're still, 2 years out from that. So anything could happen in those 2 years, I'm aware. But I just don't think the reality of federal legalization is a very substantial possibility for those reasons. I am totally with Chuck Schumer, incidentally, one of my senators, my senior senator, who I will be voting for again when he's up for reelection. But I am totally with him when it comes to the fact that you really got to get everything. In his bill, he is asking both for the business issues, that is getting rid of 280E and federal descheduling so that everybody can take credit cards in their cannabis businesses. But he is also asking for the justice issues. He's asking that all the cannabis offenders get pardoned or commuted and come home. Obviously, that is something the executive branch has to do. But I do think they could perhaps pass a law dealing with some matters related to that. Perhaps encouraging Joe Biden to get off his duff and do it. But the problem is I don't think there are 60 votes in the Senate to get cloture. So as long as Mitch McConnell wants to not allow 10 senators, or frankly, I don't know if there are 10 senators to get a cloture vote, I don't think there's a vote to be had for a bill with the justice measures. I do think there is perhaps a vote to be had on a bill that only deals with the business issues. But unfortunately, I'm with Chuck Schumer that you got to get it all, right? All these things need to happen. And therefore, I don't think Chuck is going to be willing to negotiate to have a more business-oriented bill. And then, therefore, unfortunately, I don't see anything passing this term. And that means I don't see anything passing, probably for several years. And there are good and bad about that. I mean, I know we want to get rid of 280E. I know we want everybody to take credit cards. But frankly, I'm not so sure I want the federal government telling New York how to run its cannabis industry. I think it might be good for New York to open its regulated cannabis industry, get it up and running to where it's established, and then we have federal legalization such that the feds aren't going to think about coming in here to New York and telling us what to do. So, I think anything we get that legalizes cannabis federally and gets rid of 280E and lets everybody take credit cards and deals with the justice issues, I think is a phenomenal bill. Unfortunately, I just don't think there are 60 votes to get it on the floor of the Senate to a real vote. So there you have it. All right, let's go to a few other questions from the chat today. And one that Mr. Michael Hoffman asks, no relation, at least I don't think so. Michael, if you have great grandparents and great great grandparents buried out in Queens, maybe we should talk, because then perhaps we are related. But if you don't, then I don't think we are related. And anyway, his question is, any news on Umberto's hearing today? And yes, I have some big news. As everyone that has been following me for the length of time that I've been doing this knows, as excited as I am about the fact that we're about to have a regulated cannabis industry here in the state of New York, and frankly, I don't think there's anyone more excited than me about the fact that we're going to have a regulated cannabis industry here in New York. The justice issues related to cannabis for me are what's most important. That is the most important thing that came out of MRTA. That is, the folks that have low-level cannabis offenses are getting their convictions automatically expunged. Once they get expunged, everyone needs to get their lawyer or themselves, if they're not at risk of having any warrants claimed on them if they go to the courthouse. But you or your representative need to go to the courthouse and get your certificate of disposition. That is your official record that the state of New York has expunged your conviction, and you need to keep that under your mattress. And if you go try to get a job or get a housing, either in New York where there's a bad landlord or a bad employer that is violating New York law and asking you, have you ever been convicted of a crime related to cannabis? Or if you go to other states where that's still legal, if this cannabis conviction was your only conviction, you no longer have to check the yes box. You no longer have to say that. As we all know, if you check the yes box, that usually means you didn't get that employment or didn't get that housing. So everybody with the low-level convictions is getting their convictions expunged automatically by the state. That happens by March 31st, 2023. And everybody needs either you or your representative to go to the court where you were convicted and get your certificate of disposition. Now, if you were convicted of a higher level cannabis offense, your conviction is not getting automatically expunged, but you need to go and file a 440 motion in the court where your conviction occurred to try to get your conviction either vacated or otherwise modified. Now, this is something you can do yourself, but if you're not comfortable doing it yourself, try to find an attorney in the region where your courthouse is to assist you with that. Either pro bono if you can't afford one, or hire the attorney that worked on your criminal case. But if you have too high a level of conviction where you're not getting automatically expunged, go file a 440 and get it modified or vacated. And then finally, we need to make sure in New York that there are not any more nonviolent cannabis offenders incarcerated here in New York, a state which profits from an activity for which it incarcerates people is committing a crime against humanity. And they are committing crimes against humanity in New Jersey, but we're not going to commit crimes against humanity of that nature here in New York. So we're going to work on getting, if there are any nonviolent cannabis offenders still incarcerated in New York, and I think I'm going to get some very relevant data about that from the authorities here in the next week or two. So we're going to find out. And I assure you, if there are, I am on the case and we are going to get them out. Now, we just mentioned that the state of New Jersey is actively committing a crime against humanity because they are actively incarcerating people while the state is making $3 million a month in tax revenue doing the exact same thing that they incarcerating those people for, and that is selling cannabis. I do have some outstanding news, however. We have been working on the case of Humberto Ramirez since May. I met Brooke, Humberto's wife, outside the MJ Unpacked cannabis event here in New York City in front of the Hilton Midtown Hotel. And she was just trying to get the attention of anyone coming out of that big event to inform them about what the state of New Jersey is doing to her husband. I met her at that event. This was in late May, mid to late May. And I gave her my word at that point that we were going to get Humberto out of jail. And through the outstanding work of many individuals, too many to mention here, but one of whom I will mention who had the most rubber meeting the road as far as this went, was a woman named Kathleen. You can see her in my LinkedIn post about this. She was previously a public defender in the state of New York. She is now in private practice, and thank you to her law firm for allowing her to work with us on this. She was able to work some magic down in Cape May County, one of the most conservative areas in New Jersey. And this team that we were able to put together has successfully gotten Humberto's JOC, that's judgment of conviction, modified. And as of this morning, his paperwork was transmitted to Trenton. And within the next 6 weeks, Humberto Ramirez will be released from incarceration in the state of New York and will go home to his family, where I will be to greet him with open arms with the first blunt he will be smoking in his time coming out of captivity. Now, it just does seem a bit odd to me. New Jersey does have this requirement that you have a 42-day waiting period for the state to notify any victims of the crime for which the individual was incarcerated. I mean, let's get real here. Who are the victims of Humberto Ramirez's crime where he was in possession of 6 pounds of cannabis? There was nobody that was a victim of his crime, okay? So the fact that we have to wait the extra 42 days is frankly ridiculous, but it is what it is in New Jersey. I think the next thing we're going to do is see if we can make it so that any non-violent offenders and non-theft offenders, people that are incarcerated for things like Humberto was incarcerated for, just get to go home. But currently the way it works is they get 6 weeks to notify everybody. But again, the fantastic news is Humberto Ramirez is going to go home to Brooke and his children probably at some point in September, and I can't wait to be there to welcome him home. So hallelujah. And we're going to make damn sure that those types of things are not happening here in the state of New York. We're going to make sure that there are no nonviolent cannabis offenders here in New York. And Mr. Fetter, who there's a phenomenal picture of me at that event in the Javits Center with some unbelievable bags and some things. So, folks, you should go on Mr. Fetter's LinkedIn profile and see the pictures he's tagged of me. I don't do autographs, but I'll always take a picture with folks. And there's just a great picture of me and Mr. Fetter, who is another outstanding cannabis attorney, by the way, here in the state of New York. I think he also got his real estate license. So if you need to talk to somebody about real estate, there's a guy you can go talk to. All right, let's get back to the questions. But everybody, tonight, when you smoke your joint, and I know 420 is already passed, I apologize, but hopefully you're smoking while we're doing this. But when you raise your drink or smoke your joint tonight, raise it to Humberto Ramirez, who will not be a ward of the state in New Jersey for very much longer. All right, let's do a few more questions, and then we're gonna let everybody go back to their days. All right. What, if anything, is New York State doing to provide legal spaces for the consumption to directly combat landlord and other direct opposition to prevent residents from legally consuming, such as social consumption permits, legislation preventing adverse action, etc.? All right, so that's an absolute fantastic question. Because, particularly here in New York City, there are a number of housing developments that are federally funded where the residents almost certainly will not be able to smoke cannabis as openly as the rest of us will be. They will potentially face eviction because, of course, in a federal facility, it is still illegal to possess or smoke cannabis. This is why it was so brilliant and so important that the way cannabis was legalized in New York allows it such that you can smoke cannabis anywhere in the state of New York where it's legal for you to smoke cigarettes. We are the only jurisdiction, as far as I know, in the world where it is completely legal for you to smoke cannabis like that in public. And, basically, like I said, anywhere that you can smoke cigarettes. So this idea, I think, was very important to the legislature because they thought about it, right? We have a very smart legislature here in New York, and we have regardless of some of the kerfluffles that they have, we have a very smart Cannabis Control Board and a very smart Office of Cannabis Management. And they've been thinking about these things smartly and implementing smart policies about this. So again, number one, you can smoke cannabis anywhere in the state that you can smoke a cigarette. So that opens up a tremendous amount of places where individuals that live in apartment buildings where it's not possible to smoke cannabis will be able to smoke cannabis. Additionally, to your exact point, New York is the first state where the initial law, and out of the box, we're going to have consumption lounges. That is part of MRTA and part of the initial round of standard licenses coming at some point next year is going to be consumption lounges. So this is another place where individuals that are in housing where they cannot smoke cannabis will be able to go and will be able to smoke cannabis. And for any other folks in New York that are living in places where you can't smoke cannabis, my recommendation is smoke outside where you can also smoke cigarettes, go to consumption lounges, and make a lot of really good friends that live in houses or apartments where they can't smoke cannabis. I happen to live in an apartment building where smoking is allowed in your apartment. So, the party is at my place, I guess. So that is what New York State has been doing. I think it's a really forward-thinking way to think about what they're going to do. But it is what it is, right? We'd love it that everybody can smoke cannabis within their own home. But obviously, in places that are federally subsidized and in apartment buildings where the policies of the building, no smoking at all, you're just not going to be able to do it there. All right. I think that's going to do it for the week. Thank you, everyone, for participating this week. It's been a really big week. As you can tell, I'm really excited about some of the justice issues we've been able to address this week. Look forward to there being a lot more noise about that in the future. I'm working with some universities here in the New York City about some exciting things, and about with several other folks and several other entities. So just as we get through August and get into the fall, keep on the lookout, because we're going to need your help to make sure all of these cannabis justice issues are properly addressed. All right. So, as everyone knows, we do this every Wednesday. So I look forward to seeing everybody next Wednesday at 4:20. If you're not currently a connection of mine on LinkedIn, please send me a connection request. I will accept your request without question. And like I've already said, we're all super excited about the regulated cannabis industry coming, but we all got to keep our eyes also on the justice issues. All the nonviolent cannabis offenders out of jail, and everybody's convictions for cannabis expunged. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one. And tonight, have a toke for Umberto. He's going home. Thank you, folks. Have a good one.